Thanks, Catherine. Welcome everyone to the second presentation of this workshop. And thanks, Dave, for a very nice overview of the work that we are doing. And thanks, Melissa and others for organizing this workshop. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover a little bit on the work that we are doing in the space of non-market valuation and trying to get information from existing studies and sources, as well as to see how we are standardizing them and compiling them into a database and a spreadsheet. So as we have already heard, that we have this project within the CRC for water sensitive city. It's called Integrated Research Project on Economic Evaluation. It's going from 2017 to 19. So we have finished 1 year. So this is the second year where we are starting developing and delivering these tools and frameworks to our case study partners. So I'll briefly talk about the theory a little bit of like how people used or estimate these values, and then secondly, like what we have done in just a brief snapshot, like what we have done in the previous phases or the current work with the CRC, and thirdly, our current work on preparation of a non-market valuation database. So as you have already seen, that is very important to understand the benefits or the changes in the physical condition with and without the project. And the question is then, after getting the physical change, we need to assign a value for that change. Here we are talking about the economic or quantified value of these changes. And then the question, if we have a market price or market information, that is often easy to assign values for these changes, but in many cases it's not possible. And in those cases, it's often called the non-market values, where it's not possible to get prices or reliable estimates from existing sources. For example, like we know or we can understand that many people could prefer clear waterways. The question is that how do we quantify their preferences into a benefit cost analysis framework? In general, when we don't have any market price, we have to use some other methods which are called non-market valuation methods. And typically, economists use two main types of methods for estimating non-market values, either a revealed preference method or a stated preference method. There are various techniques available within these broad groups of methods, but they have similar structure or similar feature. So within revealed preference method, is like we use observations from existing purchasing decision, existing behavior, and then try to process the information from that. On the other hand, with the stated preference method, we ask people some questions through a survey-based kind of instrument, and then from their choices or their preferences, we derive their implicit willingness to pay or the marginal willingness to pay or their value. So within revealed preference method, the hedonic pricing method, which is often known as the house pricing analysis, is quite common, and it's quite a strong tool and method, like where we try to understand if people has any value, like for a local amenity or a local infrastructure, and then whether that value is reflected through their house prices. So if you can imagine that if people would like to live close to a public open space, in that case, maybe they are paying a bit more for that location. So that's how we try to disentangle the value of the public open space to the local community or region. So it captures the private benefits of local residents, but it may not be able to capture all types of benefits, or it doesn't capture all types of benefits. For example, like what's the benefit happening or the impact happening in the outside of that local region. For example, downstream flood mitigation. Whereas with the survey-based method, the values for those what's happening at a societal level or at a broad regional level could be possible to obtain, but on the other hand, it has a bit of hypothetical element to it, and it relies on people's understanding of the issues. So I'll give you examples of both of these, because we have applied in our CRC work both of these methods and how you can actually use these techniques. Then but there is a question of that if both of these methods would take some time and resources to kind of conduct primary studies, but the question is then if we don't have that resources, what else we can do? Or in some cases, like we can use some kind of benefit transfer, which means that we use existing numbers or existing estimates from one place or one location or a few studies, and then we adjust to our own studies, our own area. So these benefit transfer uses this economic information captured at one place and time and transfer it to another place. So this is it's often used when it is too expensive to conduct a primary studies, and when we need to get some quick assessment of a project or an evaluation services. So again, there are few methods that we could apply for doing a benefit transfer. One is called unit transfer, which means that we adjust the numbers. We directly pick the numbers from existing studies, and we, for example, in this case, when I say numbers, it means that I'm referring to the people's willingness to pay estimates, for example. So we take those numbers from there and we adjust, we use it to our own context. We can use it as it is if the original study and the site that we are talking about has very similar characteristics. Often it's not the case. We have to adjust to some extent, which based on maybe income, based on maybe purchasing power or differences in socio-demographic condition. I'll show you an example of how can we adjust unit values. Then the second type of estimates or benefit we can use for benefit transfer is called a benefit function transfer. In that case, we pick a good solid study from somewhere else. We look at the functions they have used for developing or generating this number, and then we apply the function to our own site. But in that case, we plug in the numbers for our own site rather than exactly plugging the numbers from their original study, which means that in this case, instead of transferring a single number, we are transferring a function from one location to another location, and within that function you plug in for our new estimates or for our new for our target site study. So in the comparative studies where economists have looked at this comparing various methods, they have found that function transfer typically performs better than a unit transfer, but on the other hand, in many cases unit transfer could work, unit value transfer, and if and it's quite reasonable in many circumstances. So, and there is also practical advantages of unit value transfer because it's the ease of implementation and there is a minimal data requirement. Okay, so very brief, I've gone through very quickly a little bit of overview of the theories that people have been used for this getting these values. Now let's look at a little bit more on the application of some of these techniques that we have been doing within our CRC for water sensitive cities. I'll present brief details of 4 selected case studies that we have done, we have completed. All of them are primary studies, which means that we have generated the numbers, we generated the willingness to pay estimates for these case studies rather than applying any benefit transfer method for these. So the first one is a local stormwater management, where we were interested to know if there is any environmental value of local stormwater management that in Melbourne as well as in Sydney. So we know that there are multiple benefits associated with local stormwater management, but the question was then, how do you quantify these numbers? What's the how can we and how can you use those numbers into more formal evaluation of benefit of stormwater management projects? So in this particular case study, we applied a choice experiment, which is a survey-based method, where we asked people to choose among different options for improving local stormwater management. So there are what we have found through our survey is that people have strong support for this stormwater management project, which provides these benefits, and the benefits were assessed in terms of flash flood, marginal willingness to pay per household per year. So these are the dollars. So and then for 2 cities, Melbourne and Sydney. So this is comparing with the status quo, like wherever local council they are living, what is the condition, and then if with the stormwater management project, if it is possible to reduce the flash flood occurrence by half. In Melbourne, on average, residents or respondents were willing to pay $22 per year per household, and on the other hand, Sydney is the same amount. Flood, and then removing flash flood occurrence completely is quite high. People are willing to pay $83 per year per household, and similarly for Sydney as well. And then the second one was the stream health, like so the first one was related, first two were related to a flash flood removal, and then the second two are related to the stream health. Like if you, whatever the condition is currently there, if you can improve the stream health by at medium level, and they defined in the survey what they meant by medium level, how much people are willing to pay. So that's how we generated the numbers, and then after generating these numbers, you can imagine that we can plug in, like if we think that these numbers are sufficiently reliable and it's sufficiently suitable for your own project, we can plug in into a benefit cost analysis framework Dave was mentioning about, and then see our local stormwater management project actually stacks up or not. So that's just one example. In the second example, we looked at, here we have used a hedonic pricing analysis, house pricing analysis, where we looked at the value people are willing to pay for having a rainwater tank in their private property. So here we have collected lots of data on house price, house sales price. So you can see the number of observations is around 80,000 observations, like house sales price, and then we have teased out the impact of a rainwater tank by looking at incorporating various other variables. For example, like house specific measures like number of bedrooms, lot size, number of bathrooms, whether it has a pool or not, what is the roof area, all these things. And then secondly, what is the time effect, like when that sale was made, and then if there is any impact of that. And in addition, there is a special effect, which means that whether if you have some houses without the rainwater tank, and you have some effect houses you have with rainwater tanks, and then if there is any change in the trend of their house prices over time. So after capturing all these things, we were able to tease out the impact of the value of having a rainwater tank, which was around $18,000 a premium, and we observed that there's more than enough or sufficient to cover the installation and maintenance cost of a rainwater tank, which means that it is beneficial for the private residents to install rainwater tank in the Perth context. And we check the robustness through various measures. Okay, the third case study is also using hedonic analysis, and Dave has mentioned few information from this already. So this happened in Bannister Creek in Perth, and you have seen this picture where we see the improvement or the changes in the living stream condition from more concrete drain to a more naturalist condition. And there's a house price analysis. We collected lots of sales data, around 16,000 data, and then we looked at like whether how many of them are sold before this construction of the project, how many are after the construction of the project, whether it's within a buffer area, within the impact area, which you consider as 200 meters, or if it's outside of that impact area, and then comparing the changes or the trend in price for within the buffer, outside of the buffer, and then try to find out what is the impact of having this improvement project. A graph similar to what Dave has already shown is that initially the value was actually negative, which you can imagine that because of all this construction work going on. But then at some point the value stabilized around 2007 to 9, and then it's pretty much around $30,000 per household within the buffer zone or the buffer area of 200 meters. So you can imagine that after getting these numbers, you can see for your improvement project, you can see, okay, what should be the total population within my impact area, and whether can we use these numbers for evaluation or calculating the aggregate benefit. So the fourth one is we used a choice experiment method, where we did a survey where we have asked people to for their land use for the preferences for different land uses within buffer zone of wastewater treatment plant, and then we wanted to know that what could be the optimal mix from the social preference perspective. So we did a survey in Western Australia, Perth and regional Western Australia, using choice experiment, and what we wanted to find is that what's the value for different land uses. So we considered 4 land uses: nature conservation, agriculture, sports and recreation, and industry. And then we also looked at 2 kind of treatment effects in terms of like whether we present this land use information visually through maps, or if you don't present this information visually, which means just in a table that we say that okay, this is the land use mix for that buffer. So what we have observed is that consistently people have a preference for nature conservation within the buffer area, and this is their marginal willingness to pay for a dollar. This is the for each percentage increase in of this buffer of this different land use, and this is $1 per year per household per percentage of land use. So this is compared to the industry. And so if you look at this number here, for example, this is one group where they were on average willing to pay around $10 per year per household for 1% increase in nature conservation area compared to industry. So that's how we assess or we generate these values or estimates. Now what can we do with these numbers? We can see we then we picked existing land use composition of 3 buffer zones in Western Australia. So these are 3 sites where broadly speaking in buffer area A we have mostly industry and recreation, whereas with B we have industry, recreation as well as nature, and then we see we have industry, recreation and nature again. And this the bar here on the left side is the optimal mix based on our survey results that we could see that if we change the existing land use towards more socially optimal mix, then the gain in the social welfare could be around $400 per year per household for these buffer zones. So we are going from current composition to preferably socially preferable composition of land use. So that's how we can see that that's the kind of like with and without a project. Like if we say that if you implement a socially preferable land use mix, let's imagine that's our project, then this is the benefit that we are going to get from this implementation. However, please note that we did not consider the cost of implementing this. So it may be possible that ultimately it's not economically beneficial, but this is what we are getting from the benefit from the non-market valuation aspect. So these are 4 examples. Very good. Okay, so we know a little bit of theory, and we know that what we have done so far, but what else? What we can get from you? Okay, so what that was, because as Dave mentioned that this project has been developed through extensive collaboration, extensive consultation. One of the demand was that provide us the data, provide us the information that we can use in some form. So that's part of this database is we are working on. That's what I'm going to do. So what we have done, we have started with looking at like what information already is out there. So we have conducted an extensive review of non-market values of water sensitive systems and practices from Australia and outside of Australia. It's available through our CRC web page, and also you'll get a copy from Melissa afterwards. And in this review, we have tried to summarize the current state of knowledge, like as best as we can. And what we have observed is that I'll skip this. That in this we have found 345 studies in the report, and where out of those 181 reported some kind of non-market values, and from those reports, from those relevant studies, we are able to get around 400 non-market values. There is it's not evenly distributed in terms of their theme and coverage. And for example, like most of the studies or the values were related to green space or green infrastructure, but on the other hand, you could see that from Australia, it's coming almost like around 20% of those values. So most of the studies that we have were conducted in outside of Australia. So that's the message we are getting from here. But in terms of international knowledge, so far based on a review report, we have most information on the green infrastructure, followed by water supply and pricing, and then ecological and environmental value of water. But in some cases, it's quite a disproportionate number of Australian studies. That's because we are trying to find specifically Australian studies for those themes. But anyway, this is the focus of this valuation tool is for application in Australian context. So those blue studies, those are our most relevant ones for our database. So that's what the point I'm getting at. Again, so it's a bit of a spread, like where where these numbers have come from. There's a quite, as I've said, that around 20% of the studies came from Australia. Those are the ones that are most relevant for us. And then also like what kind of methods they have used with the hedonic analysis, or like the revealed preference approach or a stated preference approach. There is a mix. Like there is not that any of the single method is dominating anywhere. It's but on the other hand, you could see there's a nice mix of both types of methods, and other types of methods also in some cases they have used. So in the database, we have started with Australian studies. Since we have written the report, we have been able to find few more additional studies, and in total we have now information on 52 studies in the database, and which covers around 233 non-market values. So it's an Excel spreadsheet based database, as Dave mentioned, for the flexibility and also for the ease for us to keep working on this. But at the end of the project, we might be able to put it on the web. So this is the spreadsheet is kind of looks like this. Like the moment, so we have study identification, we have willingness to pay measures, and then we have lots of other information in terms of the variability of the information, and then what type of what's the theme that people we could identify, we could assign to. And then there is also information on the socioeconomic information of the sample or the respondent. So all these various bits and pieces, it's a long list, but I am just showing you a few of the first columns here, just to give you an idea. So in summary, out of these 52 studies or 233 values, this is how it looks like. We have ecological and environmental values covering around 55% of the total values, followed by water supply pricing, green space, wastewater, stormwater, etc. So these are broad classification. So it might be possible that actually there are more minute details of these studies. It's not exactly stormwater, it's stormwater plus heat or something like that, and then plus the location. Okay, so I'll not go into the methods because we already have said that. Well, in general, about all themes, stated preference have been used to generate around 77% of the values, and the revealed preference around 21%. Distribution by state or location. So we have most of the values from Queensland, around 26%, followed by New South Wales and South Australia and Victoria. So we have a bit of more or less even distribution in terms of the states. So last few minutes on how can we use the spreadsheet and what's our idea at the moment. So once you get the spreadsheet, like we still have to start with the benefit cost analysis framework, because that's where you are going to define your project. But then the question is what type of benefits that you should consider as part of your project. So the first one is decide the type of benefits or services you are interested in, and then you start checking our database, check the theme and subcategories that we have defined. In some cases, you have to look at for more details of that, of the marginal definition of the marginal willingness to pay, to see if there is any entry which is relevant for you. Check the details of the studies, check the quality of the studies that, and then we also have provided willingness to pay estimates adjusted to 2016 if they are relevant. But then if the policy side and the study side are not closely matching, then you have to calibrate these willingness to pay estimates based on your own condition. So just to take you through an example, let's say that we are interested in the value of planting trees on the footpath in Adelaide. Okay, so that's your project. So that's the service that you are interested in. So if you look at the database at the moment, we have 5 unique records of these values. So they look like this. It might be a bit small. So these are coming from 2 sources, 3. One is from Perth study, another one is from Brisbane study, and they provide definition of this marginal change. Like in one case is the property price increase due to 10% increase in the tree canopy cover on the adjacent public open space, just to give you an example. On the other hand, there is another one, last one is marginal implicit price for 1% increase in footpath tree cover within 100 meter of a house. So you can see the definitions, like how they have measured these values, etc., and also you can get the willingness to pay estimates for that has been derived from these studies. Understand whether it's primary studies, understand more details of the studies. In this case, we could conclude that it's all good, that because they have defined it more or less clearly, but on the other hand, they do not provide any socio-demographic information in the database. So in that case, you might want to check the original source, or you can ask for more information to the authors or to us. So now we have to check for the adjustment. So how we compare, we have gone for a broader scale because there is no socio-demographic information. We looked for, okay, so this Adelaide is our target area, and then we have Perth and Brisbane is those two locations from where the studies have come from. Whether do we have to adjust for any income difference or any socio-demographic information difference. So it's possible, you might say that comparison of income level of the cities might say that studies from Brisbane could be relevant. But on the other hand, you remember that we are interested in the urban trees. In this case, the tree cover percentage may be more relevant information for you to compare the sites. So as you can see that it's possibly that Perth is more closer to Adelaide compared to Brisbane, right? In that sense, it's a decision that you have to make when you use this database. Okay, given this closure, let's see that we work with the Perth numbers. So we already get the willingness to be adjusted numbers from the database. Now we have to adjust for our income, and in this case, I have assumed it's a proportional to the income. Like people's willingness to pay increase as they have more income, and based on these linear estimations, we can adjust the willingness to pay numbers. So there is a bit of like translation, even if you get the complete database, and that's something, as Dave was alluding to, in many cases it's you have to rely on some economic skills or expertise for that, or at least some advice, but in other cases it may be straightforward. And then imagine that you can get an aggregate value of your project based on these numbers, and depending on how many trees you want to plant on, and by which time they will mature, all these other things. So this is very briefly like what we have done and what we are working on. So our next target step is to finalize this user guideline for the database in collaboration with our steering committee and case study partners. Keep working on developing a selected working example for our case studies and adding new information as required as the new information gets generated. And hopefully this database, I'm hoping to send this draft database and the report by the end of this month to our steering committee and case study partners, and from there we'll know that when it will be available for public release. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So say, just to check, in terms of what's in the database at the moment, is it peer-reviewed literature, or is there grey literature in there as well?
We started with the peer-reviewed literature. Yep. There are few grey literature like reports and etc., but mostly peer-reviewed journal articles.
Okay, so where you're saying information can be added, that could be grey literature in the future?
Could be, yeah, if we see there's a need or gap.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Questions from the floor. Here's a question for Sayed. This is a popular table for questions. I think we need to share the love around some other tables.
Elsie Mann from Stantec. I was just looking at the types of benefits that you had summarised in those tables, and I don't see anything around health benefits or recreation, urban heat island effect flow-on benefits. So is that a reflection of the research that's been done to date in Australia, or a specific focus of the data that you've been looking to put into the database?
There are... this is very high-level classification just from the researcher's point of view at the moment, but we have subcategories, and there we have amenities and recreation and health benefits. So if you, at the moment you have green space, but then what's the value of that? It could be related to amenity, could be related to recreation. So there is another column which I haven't shown here. There we have that information. Yeah. There, I should also clarify that there are only few studies which have looked at the heat benefit at the moment, but we have one or two of them, but we are still looking for a few more. Yeah.
Can I also add, that Tranche 2, Nigel Tapper's team are actually doing some more research on that as well. So that's the second phase, noting that there probably could be some more data needed.
Yeah, we'll get some data. Yeah.
We've got another question over the right here.
Faisal Ahmed, University of South Australia. What are the reasons not for estimating the costing?
Okay, so I have to give you a very technical and administrative answer. The demand was to generate these numbers for the non-market values, and this tool is going to look at that. But when we start working on the case study examples, and we have dedicated 5 case studies around the country where we look at for both benefits and cost, and then we will apply the benefit cost framework there. So we will consider those costs there. It's not just part of this database. Yeah.
Right. Now, do we have any web questions at all
Good.
coming through? No?
Hi, Emma Turner from Hunter Water. Can you talk a little bit about the pitfalls of benefits transfer and the situations in which it can be credible and robust, and the situations in which we should really move towards primary research to get those values?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's we are dedicating quite a lot of space in our guideline on that. So one thing is that people could be over optimistic in assessing the benefit, as Dave was alluding to, which could be the types of benefits they think could come from the project. So there is already a kind of subconscious bias there, and then they start looking at the database for their evidence. So it doesn't matter where and who has done that, they could start using those numbers. So that's a very dangerous thing. So in terms of types of services or benefits, that has to be very realistic. And then the question is, do we have any reliable estimate that we could use from the database only for those types of benefits? Then we have provided our researchers' assessment of the quality of their information based on this variability, etc. That could provide some guidance of whether you should use those numbers or not. But there's a whole bunch of other things that you should be aware of. That would be part of the guideline. It's not per se of the part of the database itself. There's no filtering such as that, but it's a more general principle that how you should use these numbers. Yeah.
So there's some caution in how the data is used.
Definitely.
I'm thinking that when we develop the training, we might have to put a bit more emphasis on training how to use a benefit transfer as opposed to the tool. Perhaps that might be where we've got more pitfalls. Perhaps.
Just while we're waiting for another question, I think we've got a couple more minutes to go if we need them. The status of the draft, so it's a draft document at the moment, a draft database. Is that a draft for broad distribution?
No, it's mainly for our project steering committee. Yep. Unfortunately, and for our case study partners. Yeah, so okay. Because that's where we are going to apply these. Excellent. But it will be ultimately available for wider release and for wider feedback. Yep. That's what.
But certainly we'll be adding the preliminary literature review we'll circulate that to everyone who's registered. So at least you'll be able to see those background reports as well.
That you can.
Another question. Did you consider direct market value?
No. It's again, there is a basic assumption here is that probably the users of this tool and the framework that we are developing, they would have more information on themselves. The more difficult part is to get these non-market values, and that's where the demand came from, that we need this information at one place in some form. And then, because that's where the gap was identified. Yeah.
It's not just an assumption, that's what our clients told us.
Yes, yeah. It's what they told us, it's not.
We've got a web question down the front now.
How do you manage the reliability of the benefit prediction based on the benefit transfer database? So it's the reliability of making a prediction.
It's the same question as Lady has asked, so we have discussed, yeah. So, I would imagine that would be part of the BCA framework, where we have the sensitivity analysis and where you have to provide your own assessment of the information that you are putting in.
But also you have
also have sensitivity.
Of the quality of the studies.
We have assessment of the quality, and that's the initial step. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're out of questions there. So I mean, what we've got here is an amazing source of information. I know, having a look at a draft document earlier on, there's some really juicy statistics that I know a lot of people going to want to get their hands on. So congratulations on the work, and thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.